The Adventures of Steve and Dixie, aka Salvatore Ambulando, by Stephen Breakstone. Copyright 2025. Snippets from my journal. Episode 32, Month 12, late May 1987. Prelude. In the previous episode of The Adventures of Steve and Dixie, episode 31, Dixie and I got back to actually walking across America after months of living and working in the middle of America. And although the outline of what I wanted to experience through walking across the country was very broad in scope, everything was actually going according to plan. I mean, yeah, as you have heard, there's been ups and downs, but life was good. It was challenging, it was uncertainty, but it was good. And I was really looking forward to what next. May 26, 1987, Tuesday, Garden City, Kansas. After 8 months, we finally made it to Garden City, Kansas. We walked the 26 miles as if we'd been walking every day for the last 8 months with a full pack, and not only 2 days in the last 8 months. In other words, we overdid it. I think my mind also needed a break from the buildups, the letdowns of getting going the last few weeks, and now living the reality of being on the road again. I guess this is another example of the mental experience being more taxing than carrying the pack and living on the road. When we got to the outskirts of town last night, I decided it would be a good idea to rest the day and let the muscles relax, repair, and get reacquainted for our renewed lifestyle. I found a place to camp and considered that I would head to an inexpensive motel in the morning so we could experience a complete mental and physical rest for about 24 hours instead of arriving in the evening at a motel and leaving the next morning. By and large, once we stopped walking yesterday, we'd have about a 40-hour rest, with over 24 hours in a mentally relaxing motel. And since I was already partially into town, I set up the tent across from the police station where I first checked with the officers inside to see if it was okay to tent there for the night. It was. I watched a storm brew and figured that, well, we'd stay dry enough in the tent and didn't care, as tomorrow morning or the next morning, we'd be moteling it. We wouldn't be wet and uncomfortable for long if indeed we did get wet. But Farmer Jameson wouldn't have it that way. From wherever he was standing, he also noticed the storm coming and my tent going up. He decided that something was wrong with this picture. He came over and offered, or rather strongly persuaded me, to reset up in his nearby barn. How could I refuse? I couldn't and didn't. And he was right. It rained, hailed, and winded most of the night. Dixie and I kept warm and dry. Always a good thing. So today we are in the motel, eating, sleeping, showering, eating, sleeping, and showering. Later. For icing on the cake, it's been raining all day long, hard, and we were nice and cozy. The gods are smiling over us again. Side note. The gods in this reference are also known to me as the scenery people. These are the spirits, if you will, who provide good scenery and safe weather and good fortune in a variety of ways for people who appreciate them. However, there is a trick to staying in their good graces, which I can explain, but only upon request. Yet I can encapsulate by saying, good energy begets good energy. It's worked for me all these decades. May 28, 1987, Thursday, Deerfield and Lacon, Kansas. After breakfast in the cafe in Deerfield, the sun came out. It wasn't too hot, but neither of us like direct sunlight when we're walking. So by noon, we stopped by the only thing on the road that provided some shade. We rested by a 5-foot-long by 5-foot-wide and 8-foot-high building that probably houses some sort of water pump to irrigate a field. We rested for a while, and I had a snack. Before we hit the road again, I dug out my little radio and started walking. At noon, the Brown Bag Special on KWMR played Truckin' by the Grateful Dead, a classic song for any traveler. Other classic songs are Going Mobile by The Who and On the Road Again by Willie Nelson. And we hit the road and bopped on towards Colorado, only about 50 miles away. Keep playing good music and we could be there in one day. But then, as I was thinking that, a silhouette of a figure that could be mistaken for, well, for me. Coming over a rise on the opposite side of the road was a tall biped with a pack on its back. A few seconds later appeared its companion. It was a biped too, smaller but obviously human. I could only wonder what they thought when we came into their sights. With all of us on foot, it took quite a few minutes before we were close enough to call out to each other. I finally found peers, or colleagues, or, well, something. "Hey, who are you and what do you think you're doing?" I said with one of my biggest smiles. "Hey, Bob Bagley and Deb Deming are walking across America too." Bob and Deb are walking from Oregon to the Maine coast. Dixie and I are walking from New Orleans to Seattle en route to Alaska. We are all looking to expand our respective lives, horizons, and experiences. At one lonely time, so many miles ago, I hope to find someone else to share this adventure with, preferably a female. Then I sort of got very comfortable with the idea that this was all mine and Dixie's. I didn't want a human companion, and I didn't want to find others doing it either. I know I'm not the first to walk across America, but I kind of like the idea that maybe I'm the only one doing it right now, at least the way I'm doing it. Not for charity, nor for a cause, just for the life experience. I have even resigned myself to the fact that even if we're not the only ones, the chance of running into the few others on all the roads of this giant nation of thousands and thousands of miles was next to nil. Within seconds, we were standing next to Mr. and Ms. Nil. Most days, nothing happens when you walk cross country. The excitement is in the whole picture, not individual strokes. But you never know, as I well know. On any given day, all I can expect is being where I plan to be by nightfall. Having a goal to attain each day is healthy for my mind and it keeps us going. But one of the most important aspects of such a journey is to leave yourself open to any change of plans. It's not always easy, but, well, let's face it, I don't have that many plans besides eating, walking, enjoying, keeping Dixie and I safe, and persevering. I find it's important to keep on pushing myself each day so that I do not feel that we get stagnant, that we're just moseying our lives across America. To keep moving ahead gives the trip and my life meaning. But this trip is also the epitome of freedom. When you choose such a journey, you're choosing that freedom. Freedom to move forward or freedom to just hang out on any given day. Dixie and I didn't make it to Laken as planned. Because when we were close enough, Dixie and I walked over to the north side of the road, and Bob and Deb and my gums began to flap. All of us were so excited to be able to share stories, experiences, and mental moments with someone else who can truly relate. And each of us wanted to hear about the other's similar but different world. Bob and Deb are 34 and 32 years old from Oregon and San Diego, respectively. Until last year, they were career people who, for the prior 10 years, had jobs with computers and electronics and such. I mean real jobs, real careers, and real lives. Bob had been married and has children. Bob is a tall, well-built man, and Deb is an attractive woman, short and well-built in a robust way, especially after walking over 2,000 miles. They left Boulder, Colorado just a few weeks ago after spending a winter there. The winter before that, they were in Reno. And before that, they were in Oregon where they met. They came across the book, A Walk Across America, just like me, and they were on the road not too much more than a month later, they said. "I only got back on the road a few days ago, and even though I spent months getting in shape, I'm still sore," I said. "It doesn't sound like you two had much of a chance to plan, let alone get in shape when you first started. Did you get in shape before you even left Boulder?" We don't bother," they both said. "We just get on the road and start walking." "That first week must be a real bitch for you," I said. I was amazed. I thought it would be hell if you weren't in shape to do such a thing, and considering that I'm in my early 20s and they're in their 30s, they shouldn't have made it over the Cascades. I couldn't argue their point. And it made me think. When you have nothing to compare your ways and means, there's never a thought that there might be a different way, maybe even a better way. Now I was seeing a different way, and I understood that way. But is it a better way? For me, the most important part of running is not the physical shape I get in, but the mental shape. Especially after we left New Orleans, it was easier to continue those very rough few dozen miles because my mind knew that I could run 8 miles and climb a million stairs. In other words, because my mind knew I was in physical shape, it pushed my body, even when my mind was all wobbly. Side note. Okay, I know. A person in their early 30s is still young, and it could be argued they're actually in their prime, mentally and physically. But at 24 years old, it seemed to me that they were a lot older than I was. I mean, they were like real adults. In my mind, I was just a guy. I even had a hard time using the word man to describe myself. Bob, Deb, and I met not too long after noon, and by the time we finished talking, sharing, and babbling, the sun was going down. I wasn't getting to the next town of Lakin, and they weren't picking up a package waiting for them in the Deerfield post office. As all of us are quite experienced in the world of living outdoors, we naturally began to scout a place where we could set up our tents and sleep out of view of the road. But all we saw was a lone tree on a rise as the best possibility. But it really wasn't out of view of the road. But a house was nearby, and I found out that I didn't have exclusive information about the virtues of opening your mouth. Bob and Deb had no problem with going over to the house and asking if we could sleep on their land. Bob Price, Kansan sheepherder, didn't let us sleep on his land by his tree by the pond when he found out who we were and what we were doing. He insisted that we have dinner with him, and although he didn't have beds for us, we could set up our tents in his front yard. But the first thing we had to do was all hop into his pickup and round up his sheep. He didn't like having them out at night as easy targets for the coyotes. I have no problem with coyotes. I'm an animal lover, and they are animals. On the other hand, I have no experience with coyotes. I've met people who say they kill sheep, calves, dogs, etc. And I've also read numerous articles and reports and books that swear and document that coyotes only go after the sick and the very old or crippled animals. I've read that coyotes are often blamed when a healthy animal is found dead and half eaten, only to find out later that the animal had died for another reason, and the coyotes came and dined after the animal was already down. Or the whole species is blamed for a few overly ambitious individuals. I've also read where entire ecosystems are ruined when coyotes are exterminated and rodents no longer have predators to keep their population under control. In fact, I remember Bernard and Delma on the farm telling me about that issue. I don't know all the facts. I lean to believe that the reputation of the coyote is worse than reality. In fact, are they really bad at all? All they're trying to do is live? Are they any different from humans in that respect? Bob Price talked of the coyotes and where he laid down some traps. I'm out here to listen and learn. Perhaps later I can decide what is right and wrong with the world and then try to change things. How do you trap them? I asked. Spring traps that catch their foot, said Bob Price. My silence said quite a bit. It's a terminal condition anyway, he added. In other words, as soon as he found them, he shot them, he explained. Bob and Deb seemed to understand Bob Price's actions. Maybe they have more experience. I have a hard time condoning any death derived after hours and hours of immense suffering. But I was in no position to debate. I was in a position to try to learn and understand. My difficulty is hating the actions of this man, a man who is as nice as almost anyone listening or reading this journal. A good man, hospitable, pleasant, and had already excited us and himself as he planned on cooking the last of his elk steak for our dinner. I never had elk steak, and I too was looking forward to it. So, is this a good man or a bad man? I think Bob Price is a very good man who believes and does something I abhor. This is very difficult for me. May 29th, 1987, Friday. We woke up this morning, said our goodbyes, and took off in opposite directions. Simple as that. We'll be in touch. The rest of the day gave me something to do that I always have plenty of time for thinking. And as I was thinking, we walked on a nice back dirt country road. This was after we had a hamburger breakfast in Lakin. The back road was an extra couple of miles, although it basically parallels Highway 50. And the road had us traveling through a time zone. We finally hit mountain time. I'll take anything as an accomplishment. It keeps us going. The road is named either River Road or Railroad Road. The river and the railroad were both present. Oh, I don't know. It doesn't matter. It was smooth dirt, it was beautiful and peaceful. Hardly any cars and absolutely none of the large 18-wheel holy cattle transport trucks that spray odor, used grass, and body-blowing breezes, i.e., gusts of wind created by the truck that pushes me and Dixie off balance. Dixie had the freedom she craves to bounce around at will, and I don't have to keep as sharp an eye on her. The day was sunny, 80 degrees, with a slight and comfortable breeze. Beautiful sounds of birds singing, meadows larking, and butters flying. As the day went on, we walked. We rested, and then we walked again, in a very relaxing but forward fashion. At 5 o'clock p.m., we rested again. And as we rested, I noticed a storm building up in the west and the wind blowing from that direction. I figured I should start looking for a low point on this hilly countryside. Because if this storm hits us, I didn't want to be a prime target for any bolts of lightning. Midwest tornadoes and storms are not unknown to hit at any time. But then the wind died down and the mosquitoes and the gnats made their presence known. My muscle repellent can only do so much, as this has been a very wet season around here, and the mosquitoes have thrived. And the birds began their songs of the early evening, and the wild turkeys cried out, sounding like a woman being attacked in the night, and the coyotes howled. And the air became calm, actually. Too calm. The calm before the storm? It was a little strange. And then the winds restarted. The millions of mosquitoes and gnats were blown away, and no longer did we hear the presence of wildlife, just the blowing of the wind. I set up the tent in a ditch. It was a choice of either on high ground and susceptible to heavy gusts or the chance of a flash flood. I chose the flooding. A lot of water would have to fall before we floated away, so I chose not to get hit by lightning or blown away. It was a 50-50 guess. I knew I wouldn't know what the best choice would be until later. Maybe there was no good choice. The storm was moving slowly. I didn't know what to think. I sat outside the tent with Dixie sleeping 3 feet away. I was just sitting there waiting. I noted that I was actually pretty calm, too. Time would tell what would come. Time would tell what, if anything different, I needed to do to stay dry. We had plenty of time to get in the tent, and when the storm finally arrived, I'd be in the tent. I wasn't sure if I dreaded or applauded the anticipation. I would answer that after all was said and done. It was exciting. I felt safe. Enough. And then the tent began to flap, and the wind speed and the wind power increased. I watched the storm clouds come closer towards us, and I thought of the nearby coyotes. I wasn't sure if that was another thing to worry about, so for the hell of it, I let our presence be extra well known by urinating on the bushes and the rocks that surrounded our temporary home. If coyotes came by, they would smell that I claimed my territory. I saw that in a movie once. I think I amused myself more than anything else. Perhaps they were watching me and I was amusing them too. Finally, Dixie and I went inside the tent and braced ourselves. I figured we'd be safer, but we'd probably get wet. The tent could only keep us so dry in a real downpour, but I had no other choice. And Dixie was calm and content to just follow my lead. Then, all of a sudden, the wind started to calm down a bit. Another calm before the storm, and then flash. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds. 9 seconds and a long, loud crash and a subsequent rumble. 9 miles in closing, said the lightning and thunder. At least that's what I learned in science class. And the drops began. It was like a symphony. Flash, crash, drop, 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 and then drops of pounding rain. Here it came, and all I could do is hope for the best. Drop, 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 drop. Nothing. The storm passed. That's it? I said out loud to no one in particular. I've seen cattle piss more than all of that. I was kind of angry, let down, disappointed. Quite a dramatic buildup for all that. C'est la vie. But you know, I'm sure I would have been much more unhappy if we really did get drenched. I haven't really been caught in any bad weather since leaving New York in the van, and certainly not since leaving New Orleans. I mean, we've really been very fortunate, and I don't take it for granted. It is greatly appreciated. I thank whoever or whatever there is to thank. And we wound up having a very restful and dry night. May 30th, 1987, Saturday. We woke up today and it was hot, breezy, and dry. We walked on and we met Jerry Burns, name changed, on the Arkansas River on an irrigation dike, and we chatted as he fished. He had a day off from his job at a feed company. Jerry is a nice guy. Yes, I learned as we spent time just getting to know each other. Jerry is married and has 2 kids. Jerry has been busted 4 times for drug possession. Now he works and he's on the right track. For no reason whatsoever, the miles went on forever today. Just one of those days where I feel like we just don't get anywhere. But I think a lot. And today I thought that Jerry Burns is also an American. Oh, like all the other people I've met. Not as exciting as Lucy Parlange, or providing insight to me like the Indians in Oklahoma, or the down-home comfort of the seabirds. But just as real as anyone else I've met. I mean, some people are just people. Sometimes it seems like some people are more average than others. I'm not exactly sure what that means, yet there seems to be some poignancy to it for me for some reason. That's why I'm journaling it. Later. My body is tired. It's still the first week. Actually, today is day 7. Boy, did that go fast. It reminded me of a conversation I had with Bob and Deb. The first week is just full of aches and pains, and no matter what, that's the way it is. 'Tis true. Thinking of Bob and Deb, those 2 people with whom Dixie and I had a rare lifestyle in common, I considered our differences. Here I am, almost 24 years old, a college graduate, walking 3,000 miles with my dog on our way to Alaska. Then we ran into 2 people sharing this rare choice of lifestyle. Well, at least sharing a significant part of our present lives. But what we have in common is obvious, and so I began to think of the differences. Bob and Deb are together as partners and as a man and woman. Dixie and I are, well, that's obvious. I graduated college and couldn't think of a career that would make me happy, and I had a calling to travel. Bob and Deb worked for 10 years before they made this choice. They started out much more grown up than I did. I'm walking 3,000 miles with stops in between, but haven't planned exactly when or where I will stop or what I'll do. I'm making up as I go along. Bob and Deb are walking about 6,000 miles, I think they said, as they planned from Oregon to Maine, but had more of a specific roundabout route planned out. They know what towns they're going to stop in. Presently, they're on their way to Chattanooga, Tennessee. They carry a lot more weight than I do, more camera lenses, a tripod and such, and I only have my Pentax camera with only one lens that goes from 28 millimeters to 80 millimeters and one flash gun. Last year, I carried a converter that doubled my telephoto capability, but I didn't use it much and I sent it back to New York. They also cook a lot of their food instead of eating in cafes and markets like I do. In fact, I sent home my camp stove because I never used it. It's too tricky to rely on finding the right gas for it in the towns I pass through. I think Bob and Deb were more into natural foods. You know those Oregonians. Ha ha ha. I tried on Bob's JanSport pack and found that it was much heavier than mine, but the pack distributed the weight and gave good support. He told me it usually weighed between 60 and 70 pounds. I wonder if it's easier to carry more weight when you have someone else to push you during these inevitable times that the pack weighs, well, feels like it weighs 100 pounds. Maybe they take turns carrying some things. The weight thing is a macho mentality that I try to purge of myself. But being a guy, I could only be expected to dispose of so much machismo. Machismo? Whichever. But the feeling is not all my doing. How often have I been asked, how far do you walk in a day? And how much does your pack weigh? I truthfully say, oh, anywhere between 15 and 20 miles a day, and I try to keep the pack no heavier than 50 pounds. In reality, I try to keep it less than 40, but that doesn't work so often. But so often I felt that I let down the asker a bit. I guess people would like to hear me say in a deep, robust voice, oh, I walk about 35 miles, and well, let's just say I try to keep it under 100 pounds. That would make them as happy as hearing there really is gold at the end of the rainbow. It just doesn't work that way. I often share my experience by stating, I've worked very hard at limiting my needs by keeping the weight down. It's not how much I need, I have learned, but how much I don't need. And I like to keep it to about 15 miles a day because it's a nice, relaxed pace for both Dixie's and my needs and abilities. And there's really no rush, and that is what freedom's all about. I do my best to make them understand this is not a race or a competition. I admit I have felt guilty at times regarding how easy I have made it for myself, but that's usually at a moment of a loss of intelligent thought. Every hiker has to decide what is worth the wait and what isn't. But isn't lightweight the preference of any hiker? I would think so. And if I really need to rationalize, those who boast of how much they do carry rarely have done it strictly voluntarily or daily as a way of life. It's an interesting thought to think that I feel guilty that I found a way to make this very difficult, somewhat solo adventure as easy as possible, considering the inherent challenge. Where does even the slightest bit of guilt come from? Anyway, the best thing about our differences, I was thinking, was that now I have an answer to those so many people that say they wish they did something like this when they were my age. Well, now I've met two people who are about 10 years older than me, had careers and a stable way of life, and decided that all those things were not good enough reasons not to do an adventure. Bob still had responsibilities to his children, but he was on the road doing something he wanted to do. As a recent college graduate, I made money I needed and headed for the open road. Bob and Deb, with the money they saved, careers to put on a shelf, furniture to sell, and responsibilities to take care of, are doing it as well. And there's no reason to think they'll not finish. If you really want something, you can do it. No excuses. It may not be easy, and you may not be able to leave tomorrow or even next month, but it can be done. Because Bob and Deb and Steve and Dixie are no better than anybody else. And if we can do it, and everyone else is at least as good as us, anyone can do it too. Side note, number one. If I had thought about it at the time, I might have asked Bob Bagley more about his children. Because in the current culture of the 2020s, we would consider, and rightfully so in my opinion, if it was responsible to be walking across the country when you have kids to whom you're obligated. But it's not something that we talked about. I didn't think about it, being that time and my age and everything. So I can't really be judgmental of Bob, as I have no idea the circumstances at that time. I mean, for all I know, maybe there were court orders or maybe there was child support. I bring this up as I was once asked about it and I thought it was a good question and I thought I'd bring it up here. And side note number two, regarding all those idealistic thoughts I journaled, They were idealistic. And to some extent, I attribute the simplicity of them due to my age and experience at the time. But 35 years of life experience later, I've learned that there are, powerful challenges that countless people experience, of which I have much more sympathetic and empathetic feelings. I mean, some people have challenges and traumas that make it much more difficult to move ahead than I was aware of back then. Challenges that are major obstacles to even thinking about breaking out of boundaries. Nevertheless, after acknowledging the difficulties, I still believe that if one wants to make positive changes to their life, positive, interesting, exciting, one should just brainstorm ideas and then do the research, address the challenges, work on getting the necessary emotional, physical, financial, etc. support, and then make and follow a plan to move ahead and do your best. And of course, always have a plan B ready just in case. And number three, with all this in mind that I talked about, let me take this opportunity to state here that, of course, there have been pros and cons to how walking across America has affected me. But there's never been a doubt that it was one of the best and most valuable adventures of my life. So far. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for listening to my sharing. Peace.